and having the virtual conference before the in-person conference puts a few more corrals and a few more ropes in our wrangling system. And I also like to thank the people who are here tonight, and also the people who kind of wander in to look at this and read this and listen to it later times. I'm always amazed whenever I speak at meetings and realizing that nothing in the world but this event would bring all of these people together, which is pretty amazing. So what I'd like to do tonight is talk about homeopathy and how it works in livestock health management. And I'm going to talk about homeopathy literally from the beginning, from the ground up. I don't know what kind of experience folks have in the audience as far as their experience with this particular system of medicine. And so we'll just wander through, do a little bit of philosophy and stuff at the beginning, and then work through some very interesting cases. As you can see, you know, Richard Pitcairn, who is in his 80s now, was one of the first people to first in the relatively modern eras to practice homeopathy in animals. Talks about it as a method of treating disease with medicine. This is from Samuel Hahnemann, who codified some of the stuff, talked about how the physician's highest and only calling is to make the sick healthy. When we talk about homeopathy, it's actually a whole system of medicine, a self-contained system of medicine. It's experiential and empirical, and it's based on vitalist theories. So when we talk about science, a lot of people, it doesn't have just one meaning. So there's different meanings and different derivations that get lumped into what the modern day science is called. And so there's a sciere, which is to know by splitting and reducing and figuring out, if I see every little thing about this, I'm really going to know what goes on. And there's the scientia, which is to know by experience and become an expert in things because you're experiencing things. Those categories get divided up into the empiricism versus the rationalism. So the empiricism is, as we say, knowing from experience and from experimental and experimental science as the paradigm of knowledge. And because it's experimental science, we can never produce certainty. So we never say never, and we never say always. In the rational mind, you know, that's the reason and the logic and the mathematical stuff and the calculations. And in this system, you know, knowledge is certain because it's rational and it's not empirical. So we always say always, and we often say never. So when we look at the contrast, this slide just basically says what I said. We haven't seen every person or animal in situation, so we can't ever say all. I might have seen 1,500 animals with heart disease or lameness or tumor disease, and it doesn't matter how much of experience I've had in that particular diagnostic label or that particular species. When I see the 1,500, then for one animal, it's a whole brand new day because I've never seen that animal before. So one of the things that we want to really realize is a lot of what we do as homeopaths and homeopathic practitioners is observe. And we need to also make sure that our filters are clear so that we can observe without bias and without distortion. So the scientific method of homeopathy is based on the scientia, the to know and experience part, and perceive the pattern that emerges from the whole of observing the phenomena. When we look at the differences between biomedicine, or what people often call conventional medicine or allopathic medicine, it's really material and reductionist. It talks a lot of times in generalities. We try and find all of the most similar things about all of these individuals and put them in the same box. And it tends to be fairly mechanistic. We do this for that, that for this, and on it goes. In homeopathy, we talk about the dynamic whole system. We talk about individualities. So the thing that we're looking at as homeopaths is what makes this particular individual different than all the other individuals that we might have ever seen that have the same diagnostic label or in the same situation. And the other thing that we talk a lot about is having things, they talk about the old language as tunement, and that really is the same as in tuning an instrument so it can play play the song that it's most apt and appropriate to play. This is the Hahnemann Monument in Washington, D.C. Interestingly, it's the only monument in Washington, D.C. To a physician. Everybody else is, you know, military dudes and generals and that sort of stuff. It's an absolutely beautiful monument if you get a chance to see it. So we're just going to look at things in a little bit different way. Just the same as we do. I don't know how many of you guys are exploring the whole business of holistic management as a decision-making process. But we're starting to think more, a lot of us, about how we make decisions on our farms, with our businesses, with our families, with our livestock, with our land management, with our community management, and also how do we monitor those effects. And we find that we tend to be moving away from that mechanistic, you know, mechanical approach to the more vitalist approach of looking at the farm and the herd and the individual as all parts of a greater whole. And oftentimes it's appropriate to look at herds as individuals, look at farms and ecosystems as an organism that works all biologically and functionally within itself. And in that model, that any kind of illness or disease or diagnostic label type disease is actually a complex ecological situation, and it doesn't occur in a vacuum. And to treat only the sick individual without looking at the other whole that's around that individual, be it diet, family relationships, circumstance, herd, flock, whatever, is not going to do things justice. So people come to homeopathy for a lot of reasons. A lot of times people come, they use it as a compliance. You know, I'm certified organic. I don't know what to do. I'm gonna do homeopathy. Some people look at it is here, I got this sick person or this sick animal in front of me, and this is what I'm going to treat with. Some people look at it as more of a continuum over time. And the thing that to me is really exciting is this whole business of time and how we can influence health, not just at the moment, but actually over a longer period of time. And through, we can change the lifetime of the individual, the health in that lifetime, and we can also change the intergenerational health. And so we get enhancing vitality and health by treating this mama cow and having her healthier. She makes a healthier baby. He makes a healthier herd sire, and that herd sire in turn makes healthier babies. And we'll see intergenerationally, we will actually see improvement in health and vitality in individuals and also groups of animals. We're lucky when we work with animals because it's easier and faster and quicker for us to wait and see the intergenerational stuff. You know, in cattle, we can see it in a couple or 3 years. In hogs, we can see it in a year. In other species, we can see it in less time than that. The other thing that's really interesting to me is how the fundamentals of the art and science of homeopathy really align with the fundamentals of holistic management. And so for those of you who are exploring holistic management, and I don't think it doesn't really matter how long, in my experience, that you're doing holistic management or homeopathy, there's always something new, and we can hone our craft and fine-tune things. But it's really fun looking at the similarities between these two things. I never really started considering that until maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, and I've been doing homeopathy stuff for probably 30 years now at least, and I've been doing holistic management stuff for just about as long. So we know about the decision making and the planning and the monitoring, and we know about that we're measuring triple bottom lines of economic, social, and environmental landscape. And we also know that in holistic management, we have a continuum of the plan, and that can and may vary with the situation and the choice of the farmer. Same so with homeopathy. It's just like our grazing plan. It doesn't have to be exactly the same every day of the year. It doesn't have to be the same every month of the year. We make adaptations and changes depending on the specific needs and what happens. We're always monitoring and looking at the feedback and replanning and assessing and monitoring. So it's this give and take thing. The other similarity is that the more you work with the plan, the more success you're going to have. So the hardest thing you're ever going to do is write your first financial plan or your first grazing plan or do your first homeopathy case rather than like play spin the bottle with remedies, but actually sit down and work out a case. And just like holistic management, homeopathy works better if it's not employed for crisis management. So it's really important to think about the goals and the kinds of situations that you might be wanting to use this medicine in. To clarify, people always get confused with the H word. They always get holistic, homeopathic, and herbal mixed up. So holistic, it just means that whole idea of looking at things as a whole. So, and also recognizing that what affects one part of the whole affects the whole of the whole. And also realizing that we have holes within holes, and they're all interdigitated and interrelated, and they're one large functioning system. Herbal tends to encompass things that are made with plants. Now that could be herbal medicine, the way cattle or browsing animals or even cats, will go and try and, eat plants and that sort of stuff. They'll go to different plants at different times if they're given that opportunity. So we have a lot of self-medicating in the wild and also in well-managed diversified pastures and feed sources. But we also can capture up herbs too. And so we can make dried herbs and tinctures and those sorts of things. And there is some overlap between homeopathy and herbal medicine in that we use a lot of the same plants, but the way we use them is a little bit different. And then when we talk about homeopathic stuff, we talk about the actual dilution and succussion and shaking of substances and further diluting them and diluting them and diluting them. And that dilution seems to release interesting or maintain interesting properties of that original substance. And so the term homeopathic can be used in two ways. It can either be used by saying we're going to potentize a substance. We're going to take anything, and just add a drop of that and some water or alcohol and shake that up and take a drop of that into another 99 drops of water or alcohol and shake that up. And so we're potentizing. But potentizing in and of itself doesn't really mean homeopathic in the way the old masters talk about it and in the way that we're going to talk about it in this context. So what we're talking about in this context is even taking that further step of matching the symptom of the disease with the symptom of the medicine. And we'll talk about that as we start looking at cases and at remedies. The other clarifications, just so we're all talking about the same stuff, are the D words. So the diagnosis and the diagnostic label and the disease are not the same thing. In homeopathy land or homeopathy speak, the disease is the total imbalance. It may or may not show distinct symptoms. It may or may not show distinct symptoms that we could put in the conventional box and put a nice, tidy allopathic diagnostic label on it. In homeopathy land, we think about diagnostic labels as a description that we can talk to people about and say, oh, well, milk fever or mastitis or heart failure. But we need to realize that those diagnostic labels may look very, very different in each different individual or group to which those labels are applied. The other thing in homeopathy land, when we talk about disease, and disease is that fundamental imbalance that affects the entire organism, even if the symptoms are only shown in 1 or 2 or 3 spots. We talk about acute disease and we talk about chronic disease. Now, most folks who don't do homeopathy speak think acute disease is something that happens in, a couple or 3 days. And then if it lasts longer, it's chronic. In homeopathy land, we talk about acute disease as things that are a result of trauma, toxins or poisonings, and epidemics where everybody in the group is doing essentially the same thing. And we talk about chronic disease and acute diseases. Well, if it doesn't kill you, you'll get better on your own. We tend to prescribe for acute diseases because it speeds recovery, it reduces suffering, those sorts of things. Chronic disease is everything else. So if it's not a toxin, a trauma, or an epidemic that everybody's doing exactly the same thing, it's in the chronic disease bucket. And it doesn't matter in homeopathy land how long things have been present. So I've treated acute diseases that have been results of trauma, for example, that I've treated 5, 6, 10, 15 years after the actual trauma happened. They were sort of stuck in that holding pattern. And I've had situations where the minute the symptoms arise and things show that that's chronic disease. So it's a little hard to get your head around that, but those are words that we use a lot and easily get confused. So in homeopathy thought land paradigm, the disease impinges on the individual. The individual shows this, is a mirror of the disease by creating symptoms. And sometimes these symptoms have modalities, things that make it better or worse, or they have concomitants, things that occur in the same time as another symptom. And they always have a specific and unique pattern. And the name of the game in homeopathy land is looking at this pattern, recognizing the pattern, and then taking the information from that pattern and matching it to the pattern of the medicine that we're going to use. And we know what the pattern of the medicine that we're going to use is because we give those medicines to healthy humans or animals, and we look at the symptoms that arise. Sometimes we know the pattern of the medicine because, for example, we know about the toxicity patterns. We know what happens if you have too much mercury, or we know what happens if you have too much belladonna or atropine or something like that. Always the question in homeopathy land is, how does a medicine work? Everybody gets all mystified about this. And really, homeopathic medicines work exactly the same as every other medicine that you may be used to using already, or you may have experienced using. And what we look at is the primary chemical effect of the medicine, and we look at the secondary response of the body. So secondary responses of the body are always opposite in nature to the primary chemical effect of the medicine. So if I have a medicine that is an anti-fever medicine, the body's response is opposite. It makes more fever. So along that line, I have a fever, I give an anti-fever medicine. For the primary chemical effect of the medicine time, the fever goes down. When the action of that finite action of that medicine ends, my body's response is to make more fever. What's the counter to that? Take more of the anti-fever medicine, shove the fever down. The medicine action is finite, so the medicine wears out. The response of the body is to make more fever. In homeopathy land, we want to take advantage of the secondary response of the body. So indeed, what we want to do as homeopaths is give a medicine that the primary chemical effect is as close a match to the symptoms that we're seeing in our patient or our group of individuals that we're trying to treat. And so we match the primary chemical effect. We control the size of that primary chemical effect by the dilution and the amount of medicine that we give. And then we wait for the secondary response of the body. So in homeopathy land, I would, in my same fever thing, find out a little bit more about the fever. I have very big eyes, I have very red cheeks, I'm very hot, my tongue is dry, I'm not very thirsty. I would look for a homeopathy medicine that matches those symptoms. And when I give that medicine, it would it would not just take the fever down, but it would take the redness. It involves the redness and the big eyes and the heat and the dryness. It moves all of those things, reducing the primary chemical effect. The secondary response of the body is to return those things back to physiologic normal. All symptoms is the body's underlying voice saying, hey, something's not right here. I'm not running on all cylinders. And they serve to act as a vent that says, okay, well, I can't be running on 13 cylinders, but I can run on 9. And so bodies, if they can, try and triage where they put symptoms, to put them in a least harmful place that allows the continued, perhaps compromised, but continued function of that individual. That's not an intellectual triage. That's a fundamental life force triage. So we look at symptoms as the voice of the body. And it's really kind of insulting to the body to say, hey, you've come out and you've given us this voice, and we're just going to like say, sit down and shut up. We don't want to see that symptom anymore, instead of saying, well, why is it here, and how can we work with that? So part of the thing that we do, a lot of the thing that we do, it's like contra dancing, like quilting, contra dancing, and homeopathy, because we're looking to make patterns. We look at our pattern of the disease, we look at our pattern of the remedy medicine, and we look at the pattern of the response. And so when we talk about patterns of disease and symptoms, we talk about the location of the symptom. We talk about the nature of the symptom. Is it a sensation? Is it mild pathology? Is it bigger pathology with cell changes and stuff? We look at what kind of things make it better or worse, inside or outside, or time of day, or time of the year, or sometimes moon phases influence symptoms. We might see things in hot rooms, or early mornings, or loud noises. We also look at symptoms that might happen together. Every time I have diarrhea, I have a pain in my left ear, or those sorts of things. They're married together consistently. They can be really, really helpful symptoms. And we also look at what happens over time. Can that individual keep a symptom in one part of the body, or do we treat it and then it goes somewhere else? And then we treat that and it goes somewhere else? Or is it really stubborn and vital enough to say that, I don't really care what you do with this ear. I'm going to have an earache or make discharge or a stinky smell from it. And once we learn about body's vitalities, we learn that sometimes that persistence of symptom that would frustrate us in a conventional paradigm actually talks about how vital and stubborn and strong that individual is, because it doesn't get shoved around very easily. And it says, no, I want to make that symptom. The cases that we often think of as really successful in conventional medicine land, like you cure an ear infection with 3 drops of sinister sauce, and then the next thing is there's a bladder infection, and a week of antibiotics makes a bladder infection fine, and then the next thing you know, there's a little bit of arthritis, but that gets treated with a little glycoflex or your favorite anti-inflammatory herb, and then the next thing you know, you've got heart problems. Those show you the pattern of what happens when we don't treat things in curative manners, where we just sort of rearrange the symptom furniture and move things from one thing to the other. Where they move depends on the individual, but what we see is we took superficial symptoms and they went deeper and deeper and deeper into the body and made more and more serious symptoms. And that often tells us that either we have really, really strong medicines, and or the individual is not as strong in their vitality and their vital force. So we always want to make choices about the remedy medicine from the naturally occurring symptoms of the individual. We want to match the symptoms of the remedy medicine with the symptoms of the disease as best we can. And we have to remove obstacles that might alter those symptoms in order to let that individual show us their clear stuff. So if we've got situations, for example, like we're feeding cows a big heavy grain diet, The symptoms that we see from those animals may not actually be symptoms of disease. They may be symptoms of management choices. Same with cats with dry food and that sort of stuff. And the thing that happens is we get really tricked easily. We get tricked by some things. We get tricked by looking at symptoms and thinking they're really symptoms of the disease, when indeed they're actually symptoms from errors in diet and hygiene. So I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. I had a lady bring me a dog. Dog drank a gallon and change of water a day, and it was about a 30-pound dog. So a gallon and change of water is way outside normal limits for a dog of that size. But it was also on sort of really not very high quality kibble with a lot of additives and stuff in it. And so instead of having my eyes light up and go, oh, that's a really great symptom, drinks lots of water, I had the lady change the dog's food into a fresh and lightly cooked real food ration. And within probably 3 days, the water started decreasing, the water intake started decreasing. And within 10 days, the dog was drinking physiologically appropriate amounts of water. And so that if I'd used that symptom, I would have been tricked. Sometimes we see symptoms that are because of medications that have been used as well. And the other thing, and you'll see this in one of the cases that I'll present later on, is we can't be confused by symptoms that are common to the diagnostic label. Hahnemann wrote this probably in the late 1700s, so that, being a sustainer of health, if we know that the things that disturb health, that engender and maintain disease, and know how to remove those from healthy people. I cannot overemphasize this enough. I talk about it every time I present, and people go, oh, come on, Sue, like, what are you going on about this for? Because we just want to know how to use this homeopathic medicine. And I'm here to tell you that in my experience, that identifying these things is really, really significant. And most of what we're called to treat in food animals and companion animals and humans also are really, really influenced by errors in diet and supplementation and management. The stuff that we call hygiene, not like wash your hands, clean hygiene, but hygiene in that bigger holistic sense. And if we can understand that, we'll be able to spend our healthcare energy and time and dollar and focus where it really, really counts, instead of trying to paint health on top of an already wobbly, poorly foundationed house. And to me, that's really, really valuable. I cannot overemphasize it enough. So when we start looking at this stuff, and I'll move through these slides really, really fairly quickly, just talking about looking at when we learn to sort of speak beast in the same way we learn as holistic management people to speak land. We start looking at things like form and function. Are they actually suitable in structure and temperament and ability and being to perform the job that we want them to do in the environment that they're able and needed to perform that? Are they able to work in ways that honor and take into consideration herd dynamics and family dynamics and natural behaviors and natural habitats and their ability to select things? And are they, even in spite of maybe not a lot of good supervision, able to show us things that show that they're actually functioning fairly well in less than optimal conditions? So you see those big halen striping on the side of that animal that's in really crappy pasture and doesn't get a whole lot of anything other than the rainwater on top of them and sunshine on them. The other thing that we see a lot of times is there's huge differences in monogastric animals versus ruminant animals. There's metabolic differences, there's nutritional differences, there's management differences. And one of the big travesties that I personally believe happens in livestock right now, and has happened probably since the 60s, is treating ruminants like monogastric animals. And ruminants are ruminants, they ruminate. They, we feed them to feed the bacteria. So then the bacteria do all of the digesting and provide nutritional things. So the real horns of the dilemma here are, you know, how do we want it to be? What are we prepared to tolerate, both individually and on our farms and ranches, and societally and personally? What do we want it to be like? What kind of different ecologic and economic and environmental and human and animal welfare and social implications kinds of situations do we want to work in? And when we look at the continuum of stuff, you'll see that probably most of the animals that are in these latter slides are going to be animals where we don't have to do as much holy moly, it's broke, what are we going to do to fix it kind of interference, and we're going to be able to not need to use as much sort of treatment medicines in those guys, because we're actually really paying attention to the environmental and ecological things. This slide reminds me to say that for you grazers in the audience, one of the things that we need to remember that is dry long stem fiber is a really valuable kind of thing for these cattle beasts and other ruminants. So that slide, if you take nothing home from this evening together, take this home. The power of species appropriate management and husbandry is like so big. Animal health, land management and health, soil and forage health, increased carrying capacity, diversity, probably higher profits, profits per acre. This is the typical nutritional label that we often see. I personally would flip corporate influence and outdated science on the nutritional label that I would make, but that's one of the things that sometimes can also influence things. When we talk about nutrition and we talk about obstacles and things to think about, one of the things that has a huge influence, air quality certainly is number one, but water quality is huge. And so people talk about feed and feed quality and what supplements and this and that, and they often forget to look at the water. You know, for every pound of dry matter these guys take, they take 7 to 10 pounds of water, depending on who you read. It influences overall health and mineral balances, and influences other contamination, both as a cleansing mechanism and sometimes as a source of that contamination. You know, Stockmen know this. Penn State wrote a paper, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, that said, you know, the better quality water we have, the less problem we have with cattle, and the more milk they make, and the lower their somatic cell count is, and all that sort of stuff. We know that it influences feed intake. We know that it influences feed conversion, and we know that it influences the quality and quantity of milk and meat and eggs and hide. This is also here to remind me to just remind us how much the influence of agrochemicals, particularly glyphosate. The other ones are certainly not without problems, both to land and animal and humans, but glyphosate is one of the ones, particularly because of its exquisite influence on mineral nutrition and also on bacterial livelihood. And this slide, you've probably all seen it, but we know that glyphosate doesn't work well doesn't work at all, actually, in sterile soils. We need to have bacterial liveliness in those soils in order for the glyphosate to work. For the skeptics in the crowd, and I'm not saying there's any skeptics in this crowd, but a lot of people like to see, you know, is there any papers about this? You know, we have hundreds of years of papers about this, but some fairly recent papers talking about looking at using integrative medical care, especially homeopathy, reducing the use of antimicrobials on the farm by about 33%. It's statistically significant. We talk about treating and preventing mastitis in cows. This was a meta-analysis study, and it's actually quite an interesting paper if you're interested in reading it. We have a paper that was written a couple years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, talking about E. coli diarrhea in piglets and how the piglets that were treated with homeopathy had fewer piglets with diarrhea, and they had less severe diarrhea, and the diarrhea disease was shorter in duration. And here's another one on the human side, talking about humans that have sepsis, a deep-seated blood infection, and talking about adding either a homeopathic medicinal product or placebo on top of the standard therapies, and looking at the survival in the homeopathically treated group being statistically significant and higher. And there's lots and lots of data if people are interested in data. But we have to remember too that homeopathy is experiential medicine. And so all of this comes out of the experience of, N equals 1. I use this in one cow or one herd. That is valid science. It's cumulative science. One of the things it's really exciting about these medicines is there's no withdrawal time on meat, milk, eggs, or anything else. There's no resistance to the medicine. We don't have allergies or sensitivities to the medicine. We don't have residues in tissue. Even with withdrawal times, we often indeed see residues. We do need to, if we're labeling these, need to make a comment about the withdrawal times and that sort of stuff on the label. This just goes back to say what we said earlier, different approaches to the use of homeopathic medicines. So let's talk a little bit now, if there's no questions. I can't see all the hands. If the hands go up, and Lynn hasn't woed me, so I'm just going to keep going along here. So here's what they look like. They're little pellets. Sometimes they're little pellets like these, about poppy size. They can also, the pellet size varies by the manufacturer. Sometimes they look like those little silver things that you get on wedding cakes, those little druggies. Sometimes they look like pellet halfway between that size and those little BB size pellets. And sometimes they look like little baby aspirins almost. They're usually sold in lots and lots of pellets to a container. And usually the label says, give 30 or give 35 or give 10 or whatever. But I'm here to tell you, and it's not just me, it's the homeopathic community, is all we really need is one of those pellets. And indeed, all we really need is one of those pellets to make what we call a medicinal solution, and we can give that. So ideally, some people give dry pellets. I can give you a lot of reasons not to use dry pellets. A lot of those reasons involve homeopathic philosophy and saying, that the water dose is the way to go. For farm use and animal use, honestly, it's a whole lot easier to mix up, a bottle of remedy like this and dose it, or a bottle of remedy like this and dose it, or I forgot my spray bottle, put it in a spray bottle and dose it, than it is to fool around in a dark barn and in the pen and trying to get the pellets out. And what do we do with them? And we're going to spill them and we're going to contaminate them and all that sort of stuff. Typically what we do when we give these medicines is we make up a medicinal solution. We put one pellet in some water, stir it or shake it, and then give some of that. We ideally give it either into the mouth, actually in like where you put a tobacco chew, or on the nose leather. And if you're medicating cattle and stuff, nose leather works really great, because if you can get a drip or a spritz or a spoon or a pour it out of a cup, or there's a bunch of ways you can give it. If you get that on the nose leather, the first thing these guys are going to do is lick their nose. There are some guys that recommend using remedies in the vulva. That's never been a favorite place for me for a bunch of reasons. I think it's a little more personal to work at the front end of a cow. I appreciate if you're doing dairy medicine all the time, you're at the back end of a cow, and getting to the front end of the cow is a little more difficult. We can give them by misting on the nose or even around the head or the group. We can give them in the drinking water, and that's a really, really common way to medicate. So if we're going to build a medicinal solution, and what I would suggest that you do is get yourself some containers. They don't necessarily have to be dropper containers. They can be bottles. I have bottles not within my reach. They're like canning jar bottles, those sorts of things, and mix up the dilution, because then you'll have it. It'll be easy to use. You can put the pellets into a glass of clean water and stir it up and dose from that glass. You can put them in a vessel and shake them up or succuss them before you dose, or you can put them in a dropper of clean water like this and dose from the dropper bottle, or we can make further dilutions. I could talk the whole time we have together about dosing and how to dose and how to decide to dose. For this conversation, the logistics are some. Give them some of that solution. The other logistics people are always asking me about is, what potency do we use? Now, potency in homeopathy land is the strength of the remedy, of the medicine. It's not dependent on milligrams or grams or gallons or anything like that, the way it is in conventional allopathic medicine, but it depends on the dilution. And so we dilute things. Traditionally, they're diluted 1 part in 100. Some of the later homeopaths, middle of the 18th into the 19th century, thought, 1 in 100 is like kind of weird. I don't know why that would work. So they use 1 in 10. The 1 in 100s are called C for 100, and the 1 in 10 are called X. And so I tend to like the C potencies for a lot of reasons. I use whatever potency is available. I mean, I have a big pharmacy of a big variety of potencies, but realistically, I don't see all of my people that I consult with in person. And so sometimes they're dealing with the health food store or their own stash of remedy medicines or whatever. And sometimes we have to make do with the potency. And sometimes we have to make adjustments in how we prepare the potency to try and match that to the individual animal. So I use a full range. All the way down from 6C to 12C to 30, 200, 1M, which is 1000C, and Q potencies, which are diluted in a different way. Instead of making them diluted in 1 in 100, they actually dilute those ones 1 in 500. And they're a very fun potency to work with. I really recommend that folks try and get a hold of a remedy kit or get a collection of remedies. There is nothing that makes me want to weep harder, really, than talking to somebody with a really nice case and they don't have the medicines to use. It's really frustrating. And also some of the considerations, the logistics considerations are, is a veterinarian treating or is a farmer treating? And I won't even go there right now about that. This is a typical remedy kit that we get. I didn't know anything about bullets till I saw them in shell cases. It's a really cost-effective way to buy remedies. You can also, gather up lists of common remedies and buy those individually and, put them in a container together. We talked about modifying the dose by the number of pellets, how enthusiastically we shake, diluting into the 2nd cup and dosing from there, or the 3rd cup, actually how much we deliver, and using spray bottles and watering troughs and all that sort of stuff. Realistically, for the situation that most of us are in now and the sort of things you're likely to be treating, a 30 or a 200C with some, a couple of drops, half a cc as a dose is probably adequate for what you're going to do. We're going to move fairly quickly through the response to remedy. These slides will be available to you on the recording and stuff. So we want to look at what is the response, just the same way we always assess grazing management planning and that sort of stuff. And we look at it pattern and pace and progress. It's a process over time. It always involves the whole being. The most life-threatening things resolve first. Mentally and emotionally, you feel better before you feel better physically. You get better from the inside to the out. top to the bottom, and some, we'll always see exteriorizations of symptoms and return of old symptoms. And the other thing that happens is we get less susceptible to things as well. In reference material, you'll hear me talk about materia medica. All a materia medica is a dictionary of the remedy and all of their symptoms and characteristics. And I'll talk about repertories, and repertories are just dictionaries of symptoms and the modifiers of symptoms. So it'll list a symptom and the whole list of remedies that are treated, that can treat that symptom, and then it will have sub-symptoms that talk about locations and times of days and modifiers and that sort of stuff. So we're going to go through some cases now. I probably have more cases than we have time, but I'm going to do our best. Some of these cases you've seen before, some of them are new. I think you learn something every time you even hear a case again. So there's a few different treatment approaches. One is the rote approach. It's this for that. I have this diagnostic label. I'm going to give this remedy medicine. There's also individualizing the approach for each animal. And one of the things that's also really powerful, particularly in doing herds and groups of animals, is what we call a genus epidemicus approach, which is where we treat the whole group that's having similar symptoms like they're one animal. So I've got cases that show all of these, and I'll just move through them with you. This is one of the rote treatment approaches. It usually happens in hogs that are a little bit bigger than this guy, but it's a rectal prolapse. It's really common to see rectal prolapses, particularly in confinement hogs, and particularly as they get closer to market weight. And one of the remedies that is, and I don't do this for that homeopathy very darn often, but this is one of the times. And Nux vomica is one of the remedies that is really, really effective for rectal prolapses in hogs. And this is a little repertorization. This is computer program that just basically does math. It doesn't make selections for you. It just organizes data. And so these are the symptoms that we use. I don't know if you can see my little pointer floating around here, but looking at the symptom of prolapse of the rectum after overeating and sedentary habits aggravate, which is pretty much the story of a confinement hog. They feed them up, they chop the food really, really small so they can eat more and more, and they don't let them move around. And Nux vomica is really, really well represented in that, and can be a really super remedy medicine for that. It's also a great remedy for other things. It tends to be an overindulgence, overeating remedy. It's a big spasm remedy. Individuals in that state, they're really sensitive to noise. They're better after they vomit, after they poop. They tend to not want a lot of food. They tend to be weak. They tend to strain, whether it's straining in the gastrointestinal system, whether it's straining in the nervous system, or it can strain in the nervous system enough that they might even have a seizure. And we see it, with the vomiting and that sort of stuff. And it also has a lot of muscle spasm straining kind of things with it. It's really common with headaches. It's really common remedy if we've had lots of medicaments and drugs and poisons. It's better for warmth and rest, and when they poop or throw up. It's a rectal prolapse in pigs remedy. Arnica is another remedy that I often will use in the this for that way. Sometimes we get tricked, but it's a huge remedy. And if you don't do anything but take that slide that I showed you about hygiene and husbandry and arnica home from this, your next week will be different. And arnica is a remedy that we often use around childbirth. We often use around trauma. This pig actually, well, it wasn't this pig, it was a sister of hers, had a big hay bale dropped upon her just in her very last couple of days of pregnancy. So it's the injuries, blows, falls, bruises. It's worse for the touch. They're better for rest. They're better lying down. The arnica state always says, I'm fine, leave me alone, don't touch me. And they might say that out their mouth. They might bite you, they might chase you, they might evade contact, or they may just be one of those really stoic, the old school horses that nothing ever changes them. I was being so stoic, I changed my slides. So we'll just back up a little bit, but they're really afraid of being touched. It's trauma of the body of mind, all soft tissue traumas, injuries to the muscle. It's a first remedy in heart attacks, any contusions or bruises, dental problems, surgical interventions, that sort of stuff. It's a great, great, great remedy. It can be a really good mastitis remedy. We see that often, and it's also a really good retained placenta remedy, particularly if they've had a big, tough, if the symptoms agree, they have a big, tough birth, if you've had like a size 12 baby and a size 12 mama or something like that. This is another this for that remedy, and it's hypericum. I don't have a lot of materia medica on it. This was a calf that got hooked by a skid steer, took his claw off. The farmer was pretty smart about it, got him up in the stands, cleaned him up, put some hypericum in the calf orally, and also cleaned that wound up with some hypericum and calendula tincture and wrapped it up under duct tape and that sort of stuff. And that was a couple days after it happened. This is when he started using the topical things, probably about 2 or 3 days after, and that calf went on to go to market, make weight, was perfectly happy. This is an individualized case. This is a little calf, this scouring calf. This calf's only been scouring though for less than 24 hours, and you wouldn't expect to see, it's very unusual, so you need to pay attention to that. You wouldn't expect to see that much hair off in a calf that has only been scouring for less than 24 hours. And we know that, it wasn't found, they forgot it and found it a week or so later. That's the way it happened. And we did a quick little analysis about the orange poop. The fact that the poop was really corrosive, or excoriating is the fancy word for peeling the hair off, and diarrhea in children and ailments in nurslings. And we see this really nice remedy, mercurius, which is actually made from potentized mercury. And it's a really quite a common remedy that we see. Dose this calf with a little bit of mercurius. They caught him up and sprayed him on his nose, her nose, and felt quite a bit better. The diarrhea stopped before the calf felt better and was galloping around. Then the diarrhea stopped, and then the behind started calming down a little bit. This is an analysis for a mastitis differential with mercurius. So we see some of the extreme thirst and the acrid excoriating secretions and the watery milk and secretions and the stinky stuff, and the inflammation of bones was there because I used it for a different case, but we do often see a lot of arthritises and exostoses with that, splints, knobbly knees, that sort of stuff. Oftentimes you'll see liver congestions, and they're sensitive both to heat and cold. Mercurius is also a really excellent remedy for those kinds of pink eyes that look really excoriating. Either the tears are raw and they're making big rednesses down the face, or the cornea itself, those ones that look like the cornea is melting, like they're Mount Vesuvius and that sort of stuff. Oftentimes mercurius is the remedy that those particular pink eye cases need. Not every pink eye case looks like that, and not every pink eye case looks like will respond to mercurius, but those really ulcerative, big redness, really painful, look like they're melting does. This is just a fast little case about a goldfish. He was found upside down in his tank, literally, with belly to the sky. He was swimming backwards, and he had a big swelling in his abdomen. And I didn't know whether that swelling was air or was a solid mass, because sometimes they get inflammations of their air sacs, and they get blown up, like a puffer fish. So I stuck a little needle in this guy and I sucked some stuff out, and there was no air there. It was a solid mass. He had lots of slimy mucus. I did a repertorization with him, and I didn't have a lot of symptoms, but he was falling sideways and turning over, and we knew which way he was falling, actually, because you tip him up and he'd go one way or the other. And he had tumors in his abdomen. I decided to treat him with conium, which is a well-known remedy for just those things. It's got a lot of vertigo. It's got a lot of abdominal tumors. It's got a lot of tumors after trauma or being punched or gored or that sort of stuff. And within, how did I treat him? I put a couple pellets in the little mayonnaise jar that he was in, and that's how I treated him, and let him swim around in that for a day or so. And within the first day, actually within the first 6 hours, he sloughed off all of his mucus. Within the first 12 hours, he quit swimming backwards, and within the first day, he started coming up straight again and looked like a normal old goldfish in a couple of days. I also treated 10 acres of catfish in Texas, and these catfish were coming up to the surface. They were gasping, they were gaping, holding their mouths open, and then they were dying. And they had had all sorts of conventional medicines. They had had all sorts of fish experts. They had all sorts of university people out. They changed their filtration and this and added that and medicated with this. And these things were still dying. And desperation being such a great motivator, she was in Texas. She ended up talking to a homeopath friend of mine who lived in Australia, who talked to me. We took the case. We talk about unique symptoms, because none of these coming to the surface, gasping, gaping, and dying are unique for sick catfish. But the thing that was really interesting is they had sort of asthmatic breathing, and they had spots on their forehead. And one remedy has those two symptoms. And we dose them with that remedy and put it in the, she knew how long it took the water to go around the whole catfish pond. So we put the remedy in a quart of water, put that in 5 gallons of water, put that 5 gallons of water down the circulation pump hole, and around they went. And over the next 12 to 24 hours, they were not gaping anymore. Their gasping was reduced. Their surface coming to the surface was reduced. Probably within 2 to 3 days, they were acting pretty much like normal goldfish or normal catfish, and they didn't bulldoze them out. This case I treated last week is a good client of mine who had been working with her animals for, I don't know, 25 years now, I guess. She has a 6-year-old terrier breed. It was her first breeding, first pregnancy. She called me because the dog was reluctant to walk. She's 10 days from being whelping her litter. She's neurologically normal. She took him to her local veterinarian. Everything was within normal limits, he thought, and no fever or nothing abnormal fever wise. And the owner and the vet were concerned about Lyme disease, and the lady was really concerned because the dog was pregnant and she's actually due Friday, and they didn't want to use a lot of antibiotics on it. She was positive on the Lyme's test, but that really doesn't mean anything because she's never been tested before. So she might have been positive 4 years ago, or she might have been, who knows? And we didn't know any other changes. I asked, the lady couldn't tell me anything, and she's been doing homeopathy for a long time, both with herself and her horses and her dogs and a couple cats. I asked her about the weather, and there'd been big windstorms and changes in the weather. And so I made the first prescription actually based on the sudden onset of symptoms and the fact that the weather had changed. And what I made for a first prescription was aconite. Sudden symptoms, fever, sudden onset of any kind of symptom, fever without any other symptoms. Usually the pulse is rapid. Often they're fearful. They'll say that they feel that they're going to die. And in fact, humans will tell you, like they know, they'll forecast, like, I'm going to be dead at 6 o'clock. They know this. They often have a harsh, dry cough. They often have symptoms after a change in weather or a sudden front or a cold, dry wind. So we might see, boom, mastitis right now with a high fever. We might see a high fever, shipping fever kind of thing. I've used it in electric shocks or lightning strikes, acute founders and laminitis, colics. I can remember one day in my practice, that's about all I prescribed all day was aconite, because we'd had this huge front come through, and there was a couple cases of laminitis and a few colics and a few pneumonias, and somebody else had a seizure, and all of those different presentations all responded to this one medicine because of the suddenness of the symptoms and the modality, the causation of that. It was really fascinating. Anyway, I decided to give this dog a dose of aconite. So that was in the evening. The next day, we touched base. Nothing's changed. She's still not really up and she's not moving. And I pushed her a bit and asked her some more questions. She said, well, actually, she didn't want to get up in the house, but once we got her outside, she was a lot better and she was brighter and more interested. And she actually walked pretty good outside, and she was curious about what was going on when she was outside. And she wasn't drinking at all. That was a change. Both of those two things were changes. She's not drinking, but she is eating. She's not very enthusiastic, but she is eating. And so from there, we know that that first remedy, it didn't change the thing that was worrying the client or bothering the dog, but it did change some things and it made some new symptoms come up. And the beauty about doing homeopathy is even if we're not 100% right on with our remedy medicines, the changes that we see next, if we follow and observe those changes, that's going to lead us to the next prescription. So with this dog, what I did was I took the new symptoms, so ameliorated, feeling better in motion in open air, and I added that to the pregnancy aggravates, which is a really big rubric at both of these, aversion to merciless, thirstless with the pain, that's a smaller and more useful rubric. And we came up with a remedy called pulsatilla and dosed her with pulsatilla. They were all bad worried about, we got some more information about the Lyme titer. They're all bad worried about using antibiotics on her. The lady talked her husband out of not using antibiotics for another day. And the next morning, she was ecstatic. The dog was improved in the evening. By the next morning was 100%, ripping around, eating, jumping, grabbing the leash, trying to take the owner on a walk. The lady only had a 30x potency in her stash that she's accumulated. I would have preferred a 30C, but beggars can't be choosers. So that dog right now is still working on a single dose, one drop of a 30x remedy. She's due to whelp on Friday. I expect we're probably going to need to redose her, and I expect she's going to show some pulsatilla symptoms actually, and indeed communicating with her owner tomorrow is on my list. There's a special type of homeopathy remedies called nosodes. And there are remedy medicines that are made from the products of disease. So they're made from like the snot from a snotty nose, or the junk that gets coughed up, or the discharge from a wound or something. It sounds really gross, but that's what they're made by. And because they're made from the products created when the individual has the disease, the susceptibility, the issue of susceptibility is inherent in that medicine. So not every individual that gets exposed to something gets sick from it, right? So to be exposed to something and get sick means that we're susceptible. And the fact that you get sick and makes a discharge, that discharge carries within it that susceptibility. So we can make unique nosodes for unique circumstances. Some nosodes are commercially available. They're not a panacea, but I'll tell you, if you can really get it in your head how they work, they fill the chink in the armor that the naturally occurring disease would have filled. And so the susceptibility of the armor, the nosode fills that chink in the armor, and the naturally occurring disease can't latch on. If you understand how they work, they can be really, really useful in the right circumstances. And I've got a case or two here where we've used nosodes. This is a case I've shown some of you before. Friend and client of mine sent me the picture. What could I do with the turkey? I told her not much because it looked like she chopped her head off. But this turkey has fowl pox, and the lady lives in Iowa. She was ready. She had a whole bunch of laying hens, and she had a whole bunch of turkeys coming for Thanksgiving. And she was really worried about her turkeys being dead, but she was more worried about her laying hens to quit laying eggs, because that's one of the things that laying hens that get fowl pox do, is they forget how to lay eggs. So what she ended up doing was taking some of the goo out of these lesions, out of these blistery kind of pox lesions. She took some of the goo out of those lesions, and as I recall too, she took some of the blood out of the dead bird, and she made a remedy out of it. And she literally put one part of that to we diluted it up first, but then she put one part of that to 99 parts of alcohol, Everclear is what you call it. So grain alcohol. And she made these droppers, and she shook them up. I think she shook them up 30 times in between, and then took one drop of that into another 99 parts and made a 2C. And then she took one drop of that into 99 parts and made a 3C. She did that all the way up to make 30C remedy. And then she gave that to all of her birds, her sick ones as well as her healthy birds. And what happened was the sick ones started to heal up really, really quick. You could see a difference in them. They started to feel better. They started to heal up more quickly. the hens never went out of lay, and the birds that hadn't gotten sick didn't get sick. So it was used prophylactically as well as as a treatment. I have other no-swim stories, which we'll save for another time. A really powerful way to use homeopathic medicines in the herd or in the group is using what we call a genus epidemicus. And this works when we have an outbreak of something where a bunch of animals are sick with a similar thing. And so we treat the whole group like they're one individual. And we can only consider the new symptoms that they're showing. We don't consider pre-existing symptoms, and we don't use common symptoms. We treat the group with the medicine that we select, and then we assess the response. And typically what happens is we're either going to get improvement, no change, or we'll get like that little puppy with her baby full of puppies, that terrier with her belly full of puppies, we get new symptoms. And those new symptoms will take us to the next remedy. And so our subsequent treatment's going to be either wait, repeat the dose on those no change ones, and change medicine, just like we did when we moved from aconite to pulsatilla, depending on that response. I'm going to give you two cases that we've treated with genus epidemicus, and they're both, one's a little more complicated and one's a little more simple. And this is a group of feeder pigs. They came from 2 or 3 different locations. I think there was about 60 in the whole group, if I recall. And they showed up with high temperatures like 106 and 107. Some of them were coughing, some of them were thumping, some of them were just breathing hard. They were off feed. They didn't want to take any water, and they just looked pitiful. This was not taken well. They were in their pitiful look. And so I listened to what the farmer had to say. He uses homeopathic medicines a lot. He's pretty bright. He's a really, really, really good observer. And though he's impatient on the outside, he's pretty patient on the inside as far as doing stuff. And so I took those symptoms of that high fever, that redness, the thumping, the dryness. Their eyes were really, really, really big. And they were sort of like dopey. They were sort of like glazed and dopey dizzy, and prescribed belladonna for that group. And belladonna is a remedy made from a belladonna flower that the ladies used to use to make their eyes big and their cheeks red and nice, attractive and pretty lady. And they tend to have, as we've talked before, that high fever, really intense pupils. They tend to have dilated pupils. They can be really excited, or they can be really kind of dopey and dull. They're really sensitive to light. They're really sensitive to noise. They have dry mucous membranes. They don't want to drink. There's redness somewhere, whether that's in the eardrums, in the eyes, sometimes in the face, sometimes in the skin. Some of these pigs have like erysipelas, red blobby marks on them. They usually have big, strong, big pulses, usually a fever, usually quite a high fever, and often they have hot feet. They tend to have cold extremities. They tend to have hot skin. A friend of mine's son used to have belladonna earaches, and he used to put his head in the freezer and ice packs on his ears. And we see it with heat exhaustion a lot of times, high fever with delirium. They're worse by touch, noise, sun, heat. They're better, interestingly, by warm rooms, by sitting, and by rest. So he treated these pigs with belladonna. The really, really, really hot ones with the thumps and the high temperature, he actually medicated. He went over and dripped the belladonna in their noses and in their mouths. The other ones, he just gave it by a spray. And within a couple of hours, they quit thumping. Within a few more hours, the temperatures went down to something not as exciting as 106 and change. Their respiratory rates went down to normal. Within 24 hours, they quit coughing. We had a couple or 3 pigs develop new symptoms, and so we took them off and treated them, followed their new symptoms and treated them. So that was a pretty nice. That was pretty nice. All those pigs went to market, as I recall. We didn't have any deaths in that group. This is a long case, and it's a fun case. It's not mine. It's a case from a friend of mine. It's a case of, quote, shipping fever in a closed herd of dairy cattle. And for those of you in the group who have cattle, we know that we don't necessarily need to ship them anywhere to have what we call shipping fever, which is a severe respiratory disease complex that we see. So this is a conventional farmer. She's been exploring natural medicines in the past for the past several years, and she's been integrating changes with her herd management, with using some homeopathic remedies, getting them on more on a forage-based diet, not using as much aggressive antibiotic treatments with things, quit vaccinating, that sort of stuff. It's closed herd, forage-based dairy. They do get some grain. They've got 50 cows in milk and another 60 or so in another barn of young stock and some dry cows and a couple of springing cows. And the vet got called because these cows are coughing and they're off feed and they quit making milk. And now none of these are pictures of the cows involved, but they could be. I mean, it's that kind of herd. And they could be a beef herd too. So don't get stuck on dairy cows for this story. So on day one, these are all the symptoms. The symptoms in black are really just common symptoms of sick cows and sick cows with shipping fever. The symptoms in red are unique. That high temperature, the anxiety that they had about being examined, they were really, really crashing and trashing around. They decided, because of this approach, they didn't examine all of the cows. They examined 5 or 6 representative animals because we're going to treat this group like it's one cow, and we want to get some symptoms that we can put on this in the bucket. They had high dry coughs, they had fast respirations, and they were at their water bowls a lot. And so we don't use the common symptoms of the disease. We use the unique new symptoms of the group, repertorizing them, and tangentially, but importantly, there was a big storm weather change thing came back through the day before. It's 36 hours before. So you guys know this already. You know, high temperature, sudden onset, big storm front, you've met that remedy. We do the repertorization. This looks a little different than mine because it's a different computer program, but we have the anxiety with the fever, the thirst with the heat, accelerated respiration, and cough with the fever. Aconite is really well represented. So she decided she was going to treat all these cows with aconite, and she decided she was going to medicate them by they cleaned out their water bowls, put a pellet of the aconite in their water bowls. They're in a tie stall barn, so they had that, shared water between the 2 cows, and fill them up with a water and let them drink that before they turn the water back on into the water bottles, and to look at them in 24 hours. So here we go. Within day 1, actually, this was day 1 in the evening, 12 hours recheck. 39 of the 50 were markedly improved. 7 of the 50 didn't have any change, and 4 of the 50 had new symptoms. So for the 39 of the 50 that were markedly improved, we just waited. No more aconite, just let them eat and drink and do their cow things. The guys that didn't have any change, same symptoms, nothing changed. We want to bump them again, right? Because they weren't quite as vital and weren't quite as responsive. So they repeated the aconite, and she could have used a 200 again, but she went up in potency to a 1N. And those 4 out of 5, those are the puppy, the pregnant dog that changed the symptoms. Those are the piggies that changed the symptoms. We've got to reassess that and take a new case. So the new group, the new symptoms are down here in blue. They still had all of the anxiety about being examined, and the high cough and the thirst and the rapid respirations. But now they had a friction rub in when you listen to their chest, they were breathing out with an expiratory grunt, and they didn't want to move at all. They didn't want to move and they didn't want to breathe. So he took those symptoms again, made a whole new analysis, and found a new remedy medicine, which is bryonia. It's a great remedy. Bryonia one of the big things about bryonia is they don't want to move. And a lot of times they'll lay on the sore side. So sometimes we'll see bryonia mastitis where they're actually laying on this big old sore looking udder, and you think, oh my gosh, but holding that, or they tend to cough, if you have a bryonia cold, you're going to cough like this, holding your chest because it hurts to move. And you're really, 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 really thirsty, particularly for cold water. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to treat those cows with bryonia. gave it to them individually because there's only a few cows. So the next time, 38 of the 39 in that first group stayed improved. One relapsed, had the same symptoms. So I hear you all saying, I can't see you, but please tell me when I say, what are you going to do with those guys? You're going to do the same thing as we did with those group 2 guys. They have the same symptoms, they improve, but they can't maintain the momentum. We want to give them another little push. So we're going to dose them again. Of that group 2, we had 6 of the 7 improved, the ones that we gave the aconite to again. And we had 1 of the 7 show up with new symptoms. So we're going to make her into a little subgroup. The record keeping gets kind of weird here, but it makes sense. And then all of those cows that got bryonia, all were improved. So we're going to do the same thing with that little subgroup in that second group. What's the new symptom? Diarrhea in the new symptom. The decreased milk production and the off feed is, that's sick cow stuff. The other things still maintained about the same. Here's our little repertorization again, talking about anxiety and the fever and thirst with the heat and accelerated respiration and diarrhea with the fever. And there's several remedies up in here. Without belaboring it too much, we chose phosphorus for those cows because they didn't have the restlessness that you would expect with the arsenicum. They didn't have the drinking pattern. Arsenicum cases tend to want to take little sippy drinks. They tend to be restless and want to move around a lot. Phosphorus tend to be more generally anxious, and they tend to drink lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of water all at once. So for those reasons, the plan was that we're going to dose that new symptom cow with phosphorus. You all told me, I'm hoping in your heads, that relapse cow, same symptoms, let's give her another dose of aconite. And those 4 out of 4 improved cows, those cows, we don't have to do anything with them, right? They're trucking along. They're moving. We don't need to bump them again because they're continuing to improve. And so the plan looks kind of like this on day 3. And I used the chart that she built to do this. So our group 1 cows on day 3 now, we're 3 days into this. They're all improved. So we're not going to do anything with them. Our group 2 cows were our cows that got the second dose of aconite because they didn't improve. So the 2A, the bryonia cows, they slightly improved, but they didn't get really better, but the symptoms were still the same. So you repeat that remedy again, bump them again. The pattern didn't change. They just need another little push. This cow that we had the new symptom of diarrhea was quite a bit improved. So we don't need to do anything with her. And then of the other cows, we had 2 of those cows got the new symptoms of reluctance to move with breathing. They had new friction rubs. And so they went newly into that bryonia state. So that's what she's going to do. And that's what got done with the cows in the barn. But in the other barn, in the dry cows, with the dry cows and the calves and all of that sort of stuff, they had these, that's what was in that barn at that time. So the dry cows had the friction rub and the reluctance to breathe. So they're in the bryonia state that you met here a couple of days ago. Let's dose them with that. The one dry cow had respiratory symptoms and she had diarrhea in the same pattern as that other phosphorus cow. And they had a springer, a heifer ready to calf, and a hutch calf that had symptoms that were present in the initial outbreaks. So they dosed them with aconite. And then she went through the rest of the animals who didn't have any symptoms yet, and she dosed them with aconite in a prophylactic manner. And indeed, talking to the clinician, she said, she had this situation back again. She would have at day 1, maybe day 2, when she saw the improvement from the aconite, gone into that second barn and just dosed everybody preventatively with the aconite. So moving along with this case, Now they started just giving daily reports. By day 6, everybody was improved. The milk production was back to normal. Nobody knew sickness. 2 of the old cows from the old management system, or indeed the oldest cows in the herd, had got different symptoms. And so they reassessed those and treated them as individual prescriptions, not as genus epidemicus cows. The rest of the story is on day 6, before day 6, actually, the milk production was back to what it was before the epidemic. Everybody looked healthy. They did a routine herd health, and my colleague went and rectalled everybody, because usually after these kinds of big fevers and shipping fevers, they slip calves and resorb calves and forget to come into heat and all of that sort of stuff. So everybody was still pregnant and everybody was still cycling where they needed to be, which is totally amazing. Totally amazing. And I've seen everything from, 5 or 10% lost calves all the way through to way lots of lost calves, like 60, 70, 80% lost calves in these kinds of stories. The rest of the story is she didn't have any dead cows. Usually you have a couple or 2 or 3 in those kind of situations end up dead. They don't have any milk withholding. And usually, depending on the meds, if you treated those guys conventionally, you'd get 3 to 5 or 7 days withholding. The milk production stayed pretty high throughout and was back to pre-pandemic levels or pre-epidemic levels within a week. And usually the production really tanks, and it takes a couple or 3 or 4 weeks to even get up. So you've got more milk in the tank faster with these guys. And the cost of this treatment, including all the farm calls and professional services and that sort of stuff, was about a third of what it would have been had they treated them conventionally. And that's without any continued sequelae or lagging cows or anything factored in. I do have some financial analysis on this particular case that we're going to do in the session on Friday. But it's just a really beautiful case about how we can treat all of these larger groups. And for folks that say, oh, man, homeopathy is too hard, Sue, to do, I got 200 cows. Most of the time, if you got usually 200 cows in a crisis, which is when people say you can't do homeopathy, this is to show you ways that you can do homeopathy successfully with that. So
just want to let you know we've got 5 minutes left.
Yep, I was just going to say, in our last 5 minutes, what's next? If you're interested in this sort of stuff, I would recommend that you get your supply chest stocked. We're going to talk a little bit tomorrow about the kind of things that not tomorrow, Friday, about the kind of things that you might want to put in that supply chest and some dosing and preparation supplies. Get some resource materials on hand, be those printed books, or there's some online resources that I'm happy to share with you. And there's also some specialized homeopathy programs for people who are serious enough about it that they, want to make a larger monetary investment. And I would use your plans and observe the results and assess the responses and alter things as required. And for crying out loud, don't wait for the, oh my gosh, I've tried everything. They're going to come and euthanize him on Thursday if this doesn't work. Just desperation kind of cases. Don't cut your teeth on those. Those will make you crazy. Sometimes, they can be really successful and they're really great homeopathic conversion cases too. But treat stuff that treat like your calving stuff. See how your cows with tough calvings respond to arnica. See how those cows that don't want a mother, or those babies that leave me alone, I don't even want to drink. See how they do with arnica. See what your fever cases do with belladonna. You guys know aconite a lot better than you did, probably most of you, some of you, when you came into the room. So those are things. The other thing that we're doing with the folks at AGA, and the fact that it isn't done yet is totally my fault because of some family things that have been happening in my world in the last few months. But we're going to do a course. It's going to be a 6-part course in practical homeopathy, teaching people how to take cases, teaching people how to assess situations and pick out the best rubrics to use, getting down and dirty in the books. There'll be some, paper cases and actual cases and that sort of stuff. We'll talk about nosodes. We'll talk about genus epidemicus stuff. We'll do a lot more materia medica and dosing finesse. And so, if you're interested in that, let me know, or we can capture that in the chat, or let the folks at AGA know, and just keep your eye open for that. So we've got a few minutes formally, and I'm happy to stay on it informally, although I'm sure Lynn is like tired. If there's any specific questions, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I'm always fascinated by explaining and showing people how much value homeopathy can bring to people's lives, for their animals, and everything that I said here holds for humans too. Thanks very much for your attention.